Get Peppy. This is episode 75, and it seems to me that every week during this pandemic, it's like a choose your own adventure where every choice sends us down a path to a lower technical quality. Within a few weeks, I'm going to be recording in a gutter somewhere using a tin can with a string to broadcast. It's just getting lower-fi and lower-fi. Today, I am in the techies room doing a Zoom broadcast without a microphone. So we'll see how this goes. I'm joined by none other than the people's champion, Bill Wyman. Hello, Bill.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Chaz. So good to see you.
Now, for the people who don't know who Bill Wyman is, I've gone to a little bit of trouble since I'm recording this at 6 p.m. I had a little bit more time to prepare, and I spent it going through your bio, Bill. So let's tell people who you are. Bill is a journo. He's a long-time American journo. He used to work at Salon.com. He was assistant managing editor at NPR in Washington. He writes about media, culture, politics. He's written for the Times, Wall Street Journal, New Yorker. He's been in Sydney for like 2 years now, 3 years, something like that.
2 years, yeah.
He writes occasionally for the Herald about US politics, and he's starting apparently a new class on journalism you're teaching at Sydney Uni. Do we need to promote it? Are you sold out? Do you sell out?
I bet. And plus, I think you have to be a student, but it should be really, really fun. It should be super, super fun.
Is your class going to take on Dr. Dave's class, Jets and Sharks style?
You know, it could, because I'm going to have a young and scrappy group, okay? And this is first year journalism students, so we're going to be learning the basics of news. So I'm going to get them young. So I'm thinking maybe at the end of the first year, we could have some lean, mean fighting machines, and we can go over and do a bumps rush on the United States Study Center, and let's see what happens.
I like the idea. You need to teach them to dance and click and use switchblades all at the same time.
and we'll have we probably get a tie-in with the new Spielberg version of it.
I didn't even know that existed, but I'm surprised that you know.
Well, it is something that neither you nor 8 billion other people in the world ever asked for, but Steven Spielberg is doing it.
Now, since this is a Zoom podcast, I'm going to try to not talk over you because it's going to go crazy, but we'll do our best. Is this going to be a lockdown class that you're teaching? Presumably in Sydney, it needs to be, doesn't it?
The first month, I think they're saying is going to be remote.
Well, I hope for your sake, Bill, that your students pay more attention than my children do during their lockdown classes at school. That's all I've
been teaching at UTS and RMIT, and honestly, I say this with deepest sincerity, we shall appreciate this. Everyone is suffering, but these university students are being such good sports. I really have to say it is a terrible thing to go through. And I think they've been doing a really great job. So I have had no complaints with the students at all.
Sounds like you're going to be a pushover, Bill. Now, since
they call me Bill Easy A Wyman.
Since we're recording this from the tech room next to my office, I've got all my usual accoutrements that you guys don't know about, like the fennel that I eat like an apple. This, if you thought I was weird before, you should see the stuff that I do at my desk. But anyway, I'll try not to eat fennel during this podcast. A few updates. First of all, we got a message from Mark Carman last week. He was responding to me talking about Lindsey Graham, saying that Lindsey Graham would try to deny quorum to the Senate for the reconciliation bill if they tried to put immigration amnesty in the reconciliation bill. I'll just read you what he said. Just to comment on the Senate quorum point. The Senate rules, based on, you had a link, say that a quorum is presumed until someone challenges the presence of a quorum. And the quorum call can also be ended by unanimous consent. Meaning, if you leave behind a Republican to challenge the presence of a quorum, you have 51 senators and a quorum. But if all the GOP senators leave, a quorum is still presumed, and the Dems can do almost whatever they like via unanimous consent. There's no way Lindsey Graham didn't already know this. And that is so true with everything stupid that Lindsey Graham says. Everyone knows that he knows that it's not true, but he does it anyway because he's appealing to people who don't know this. But anyway, there's a great point from Mark. I should have known that. Just want to share that with everyone. Another little update. before we get into the new stuff. A little bit, we've talked about police reform endlessly on this podcast. I saw a rather dispiriting poll that, look, maybe it's just a one-off. It may be, it may not be, but it's starting to confirm the bias that I already had, which is when we were talking about police reform last year, I used to moan a lot about how much I hated the defund the police mantra, because I said, police reform is serious. There is a lot of reforms that need to take place with the police. The police have all kinds of issues, but when you start saying stupid things like, oh, let's get rid of all the police, what that does is it creates a backlash against all reform, including the sensible reform. And I was worried that defund the police would steal the headlines and attract all the color and create all the marches, but wouldn't get anything done. And the movement would pass us before any actual police reform happened. And I saw a poll and I thought, oh dear, this is a Harvard-Harris poll. 75% of people want more police on the street. 72% oppose defund the police. 56% oppose ending cash bail. 52% support stop and frisk to deter gun crime. That was the one I really thought, oh my God, we got to a point where majority supports stop and frisk again. I think that we've talked about crime before, you and I, on this podcast, Bill. I think the crime thing is getting under people's skin. And I think they're starting to backlash against against police reform. And that is what the poll tells me.
And okay, that really could be. But I just, as someone who has lived in America, the drumbeat you get from local news about crime is the same, whether crime is declining or whether it's going up. So I would bet you a lot of money that 3 years ago, if you did that poll, people would still say the same thing. And again, because I used to live in Phoenix, and it was so weird when I went back there, because you go to your mom's house, you go to their friend's house, and people just have the local news on. And it's like crime, 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 crime. And this is why I'm so vociferous about this. Then you start looking up the statistics in a place like Phoenix, and where there's, crime is whatever, I forget the statistic, 35% what it was 20 or 30 years ago. It's almost unheard of. I don't want to say unheard of, but it's very, very low. But people always are convinced by it. So, and as we discussed, there is some uptake in certain cities. Even so, as I think we were talking about, I forget again, I wasn't prepared for this, but whatever the uptick was in Los Angeles, it was up, what was it? It was like from 35 to 42 murders or something like that.
Yeah.
In the second largest in the United States. So yes, murders went up by 20%, but it was 7 people, which is 7 tragedies. But, we're not talking about thousands of people getting gunned down in the street. So it used to be in New York City.
Yeah, sure. Another update on Afghanistan and the movement to try and get America's allies out of Afghanistan before it's too late. We've talked about this a bit on the podcast as well. Essentially, the biggest problem here, apart from America taking them, because America does seem to be interested in taking them now, which is nice. The Senate passed a bill to help that recently. The biggest problem at the moment is that the people involved need to travel to Kabul to get flown out, or alternatively, they can travel to a different country. Either way, the roads are owned by the Taliban. There's roadside bombs all over the place. There's crime all over the place. And so it's a real ordeal to try and get yourself to a place like Kabul or out of the country when the Taliban are looking for you. They know the people who helped out the Americans and they're trying to kill them. And so it's a bit Mad Max, unfortunately, for a lot of these people to get into a position where they can be jetted out. And even if they do get to that position, they still need to go through a process. They need to fill out forms. Some of those forms, some of these people don't speak English. Some of them are translators, that's fine. Others aren't translators and they don't speak English and they don't know how to deal. They need legal assistance to deal with the forms, and there's no one there to do that.
And the people who might perhaps they used to deal with, and their allies or their mentors or the people they helped out on the American side, they might not be there anymore. Yes. Or they might have gotten transferred, and it's kind of easy. It's kind of hard to say, oh, hey Joe, I'll take care of you. You tell them to call me when you need help. And of course, how do you get hold of that? And I think this 'twas ever thus with Americans fighting foreign wars. I'm sure it happened in the Korean War, the Vietnamese War. I know it happened in the Iraq War. I have a good friend who was a Kurd, who was a translator in Baghdad and stuff like this. And it was very, I mean, he was literally had guns fighting Saddam up in Kurdistan. And the Americans finally said, go to Turkey. And he sat in Turkey for 2 years. And then all of a sudden one day they go, we got you. And they put him on a plane.
That was exactly what I was about to say. Even when you get to a place of safety, you might be waiting for a year or two before they get to you.
He literally sat in Turkey for 2 years. And I forget how much notice he had been on. And the only reason I know him is that they just put him on a plane and he thought he was going to Chicago, but that was the stop off and he got thrown off in Phoenix.
That the ordeal really started then.
Little did he know.
Yes. On that note, I read a first-hand account of an Afghan translator who's been hunted down by the Taliban and he's trying to get away. It was on Just Security. I'll put a link to it in the blurb. If you look at the blurb, if you're watching either on Facebook or YouTube, you click on the blurb, you'll see in the homework that link. Have a look, have a read. It's quite interesting. Now, it sounds a bit weird to do this, but I feel like we should. Do you have anything about the Olympics? We should mention the Olympics because let's face it, every single person who is listening or watching this podcast has spent a lot of time over the last few weeks on the Olympics. Is there any particular sport that you'd like to talk about?
I'm sure I have the feeling. I'm not a sports person, but of course I admire everyone who participates. You feel it's so poignant to see the people come from these microscopic countries. You think, what are the stories that brought them for? So sad. It's just like with students. There's so many people in the world who are actually dying because of the COVID. You can't feel too bad, but boy, all these people have worked and having to perform and do everything they do under those circumstances. I don't feel that bad for NBC. And I think it's been very interesting watching the Australian coverage because it's so different from NBC coverage, which is at once technically extraordinary and also incredibly pro-American and often silly. And it's refreshing not to have to watch Bob Costas. So there's that. I find the 7+ app incredibly frustrating.
Yes.
I find trying to watch it on Foxtel unbelievably bad. The whole idea, like you tape all these Olympic things and there's no way to tell what you're going to be seeing in any of these 3 or 4 hour long things, and the duplication. And I also love how you'll be taping the Olympics, right? And it's 3 hours long. And about 2 hours in, it says, oh, if you want to keep watching the Olympics, change the channel.
Yeah, yes.
Oh, why didn't you tell me that when I was taping it?
Well, it's very important that they make room for border security because that's what we all want to watch. We are Australians.
That's all I think about it. It's really heartbreaking on certain levels. And how about those skateboarders?
What are you trying to watch on 7+?
Well, just I mean, 7+ is a good idea where, hey, you can just watch whatever you want, but it's very kludgy. And, just trying to get to something to watch takes literally minutes. And then if you want to sort of fast forward, you get 2 hours of skateboarding or whatever. And of course, there's 20 minutes of stuff at the beginning, and it takes 4 or 5 minutes just to fast forward. You know what I mean? It's a great idea that it's all there, but the interface is terrible. For
me, the Olympics is 100% about the handball, the European handball. I love European handball. It's just have you ever watched European handball? It's the ultimate sport. It's like cross between indoor soccer and basketball and rumbling. Like it's so violent. It's just fantastic.
Oh, okay.
And let me suggest to people, let me give you the hot tip. 6 p.m. tomorrow is the men's final, Egypt, Spain, and the women's finals. Well, I think the women's handball is actually better than the men's handball. That's at 4 p.m. on Sunday. I think it's going to be Norway, France, but Sweden and Russia might have something to say about that. Actually, back in 2000, when the Olympics was in, I'll tell you a very quick story, Bill. Back in 2000, when the Olympics were in Sydney, I thought to myself, the host nation has to compete in every sport, no matter how bad they are. So this is the perfect opportunity to pick a sport that Australians don't play and become an Olympic athlete, right? And so I picked European handball because I happen to really love European handball anyway. And I figured no one in Australia plays European handball. If I just show up, I'm going to be a national representative. And yes, we're going to get absolutely tanned by everyone else, but who cares? I'll be at State Olympic Village. Yeah, it'd be awesome. Yeah. And so I, the year before, seriously tried to join the Australian European handball team. And I was rather dismayed to find that there are about maybe 50 people in the whole country who play European handball, and every single one of them is taller than me. And so,
so you would be a scrappy little.
I was a very scrappy dude, and I took out a fair few of them, but I wasn't good enough to make the team, unfortunately. But I did go and watch all the European handball. But it does make me think that Brisbane is doing the Olympics in 11 years, which means if there's a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old who's listening to this podcast, now's the time for you to pick your sport, and no matter how bad you are, and represent Australia at the Olympics in 2032. Like I was thinking maybe fencing, because I don't think anyone in Australia does fencing. Like basically, if you want to find a place to fence, to see fencing, you need to travel back in time to the 1980s and go into a film with James Spader. That's essentially what you need to do to see fencing. It's I don't know where you do it, but I reckon that's a sport. Do you have any theories about the sport to play?
Well, no, I'm just saying this is the kind of big picture thinking, Chaz, that that really captures that Olympic spirit.
How to dodge your way into the village.
Yeah.
Okay.
That would be super. That's very, and it really is. The Brisbane thing is so exciting, and it's so great the way they did it finally, because that committee is so corrupt. And there's been so many scandals of it over the years that it's great they're finally dispensing with all the competition and just choosing a city, right?
Absolutely. In terms of like getting us straightening up a little bit to talk about what Americans are talking about briefly, we did talk about Simone Biles a little bit in the last podcast, and I did speculate because at that point in time we didn't have a lot of evidence, but I said, look, it's pretty clear when you watch the replay of her jump that she screwed up what was going on, and that was that she lost track of where the ground was. It was really, really obvious. Her head was spinning, her eyes were spinning. You could see in the slow-mo that she had no idea where she was. And it had nothing to do with, inverted commas, mental health or not feeling great about herself or whatever people were spinning at the time. It was just obviously she physically couldn't do it. And so people shouldn't have given a shit about it because she had no other option. It's like saying to someone who breaks their arm, go out and play football. You can't do it. Like you're injured. And like her balance was injured, obviously. And as soon as I got back after recording that podcast, I saw that she put out a video showing her in training. And it just showed her just stacking it over and over again. I'll put the vision up right now while I'm talking about it. And you can see that, yeah, it was correct. So just for those who haven't seen that video, just cut her a bit of slack because she literally had no idea where the ground was. Like things were happening in her head. The stupid controversy of the week, though, with Americans this week was Lauren Hubbard. Sorry, I don't know if you know who Lauren Hubbard is. Lauren Hubbard is a transgender weightlifter for New Zealand, and the Conservatives were very, very up in arms about that. In the end, it was a massive anticlimax because Lauren Hubbard didn't even complete a lift. She didn't complete one lift. She's a 43-year-old transgender woman who obviously once was a man and now is a woman, and they're saying it's unfair and all the rest of it, but she made no difference whatsoever. But the reason I wanted to bring her up was because I feel like it's a great example of why we need to chill out with this kind of stuff, no matter where you are on this issue. This is new ground. If we're being honest, no one knows how much advantage that someone who's born a man who becomes a woman has, even after hormone treatment and all the rest. Like it's in different sports, there'll be different advantages. In some sports, there'll be no advantage. In some sports, there'll be a huge advantage. It will depend on different times since you transition. It will depend on all kinds of things. Every transgender person is different. So it's going to be really, really hard to get the rules down.
But Chaz, what you're saying here is you're saying that people should sort of step back and be tolerant and wait and let information come over a period of time and have patience and sort of see what happens, as opposed to being assholes and persecuting people who, in the overall scheme of things, are among the most persecuted people on earth in the first place.
You're not optimistic? That's
you die on that hill.
Yes. I might be foolish, but I'm not the only one. But yeah, I was going to say that, like the day after Lauren Hubbard competed, the IAC said we're going to be tweaking the the standards a little bit because we've learned a bit more, which is they're going to keep on doing it for next decade, probably, maybe a couple of decades. They'll be gradually tweaking it as we learn more and more and more. And just people just need to, yeah, you're right. They're not going to chill out, but I wish they would. That's,
and a long time ago, someone I worked with had this great line, and it was about some Chicago, what they call aldermen, which are council people, just being complete idiots the way so many people are today. And he meditated on it. His last line it was something like, but history will remember these people as idiots, creeps, and poltroons. And I often think of that line. It was something like that, but he ended with the word poltroons. And it really is true that back in the 60s, you had people saying these things that blacks and whites couldn't marry and they couldn't go to the same swimming pool. And you said this about gay people. And, you know, they used to say about Catholics and Jews and everything else, and Irish, of course, and Italians. And so that's the thing to remember, that we get, and it's all these bills. It just goes back to the civil rights era too. Just everything that went into this passing the civil rights bills, which we all defend today. The same sort of coalition of people that we're hearing today opposing everything were around then. And of course, history has not remembered them with a great deal of respect. And I think we have to remember that that's what's going to happen to a lot of the goons out there today.
Well, talking about the goons, I'm not sure if you saw what Trump had to say about the American women's soccer team, but I'd like to read it out to you. If our soccer team, headed by a radical group of, oh, by the way, they lost their semi-final. They've just won the bronze medal. They beat Australia last night, 4-3. If our soccer team, headed by a radical group of leftist maniacs, wasn't woke, they would have won the gold medal instead of bronze. Woke means you lose. Everything that is woke goes bad, and our soccer team certainly has. There were, however, a few patriots standing. Unfortunately, they need more than that, respecting our country and national anthem. They should replace the wokesters with patriots and start winning again. The woman with the purple hair played terribly and spends too much time thinking about radical left politics and not doing her job. Okay, couple of things quickly. First of all, the woman with the purple hair was best on ground last night. He obviously didn't watch the game. No surprises there. Secondly, as far as staying for the anthem goes, the American women's soccer team have been standing for the anthem all year. Once again, he clearly hasn't watched any games for a long time. Thirdly, I don't understand. A lot of American, in particular American conservatives, like to suggest that as soon as you get woke, you lose ratings. Oh, the Oscars rated poorly. It's because they were woke. Oh, the Olympics are rating poorly. It's because they're woke. Or your performance goes down. I'm never quite sure what the mechanism is by which the performance is supposed to go down when you become woke. Like, for instance, I haven't watched the American coverage, but I imagine the American coverage isn't filled with constantly talking about whether people are kneeling before anthems or not. Like, certainly the Australian coverage, they're too busy showing sport to worry about what happens before the match. Like, it's just, there's a million different sports going on at the same time, as if people are going to be talking about that shit. Like, so the, like, no, Bill?
But it's all based on this thing that all this dialogue on that thing, of course, is driven by Fox News and right-wing media, which is all based on people looking for things that they can pull out of context or pull out of obscurity, right, and blow up and then talk about. So it's just sort of the business model, and Trump's just sort of one of the big, I guess you call an influencer in that ecosystem. So I agree with you. It's silly, but that's just what they do. It's like, what Jon Stewart used to call that perpetual outrage machine. And they just have all these people working really hard. The only big change these days is it sort of used to be people like Karl Rove and Roger Ailes sort of getting together and sending out the talking points in the morning. And these days it's a little more confused, and you've got Tucker Carlson going off message and Hannity going off message, or not. I don't want to say going off message in terms of contradicting, but doing ever crazier things like going to Budapest and stuff like that, rather than coming home and staying on message. But that's just part of it. And again, that word woke is just like political correctness. I love how they take these words that are used ironically in this subculture, and then they take it out and use it as a cudgel when it was originally used as sort of an internecine cudgel.
Yes, that's exactly, that's a lovely way of putting it. We should get into politics though. First of all, Yeah, yeah. Let's start with the CDC eviction order and eviction moratorium, and I'll just describe the situation, and then I'll throw to you for your opinion about it all, and then I'm going to rant because I've got some ranting to do on this one. So just briefly, for people who don't know, for the last 18 months, there have been a series of orders, first from the CDC, then from Congress, and now from the CDC again, which is basically been to the effect of that if you earn less than $99,000 a year, you cannot be evicted from an apartment that you're renting, even if you don't pay the rent, okay? And the idea is that during the pandemic, a lot of people are unemployed, a lot of people don't have the capacity to work, don't have capacity to earn income, and so they don't want them to be chucked out in the street. Now that went to court, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. It got to the Supreme Court when, well, the Supreme Court verdict came down 2 weeks before the eviction moratorium was due to expire. And it was a balanced court, 4-4, with the deciding judge being Brett Kavanaugh. And Brett Kavanaugh essentially sided with the guys who said, this is the conservatives who said, this is not a legit order. You shouldn't be allowed to do this. That's too much power for the bureaucracy. I won't go into detail about the legalities there, but essentially, even though he agreed with the conservatives, he chose to not invalidate the order. And the reason for that was, I'll read his quote. I agree with the district court and the applicants that the CDC exceeded its existing statutory authority by issuing a nationwide eviction moratorium. Because the CDC plans to end the moratorium in only a few weeks, on July 31, because those few weeks will allow for additional and more orderly distribution of the congressionally appropriated rental assistance funds, I voted this time to deny the application to vacate the district court's stay of its order. In my view, clear and specific congressional authorization via new legislation will be necessary for the CDC to extend the moratorium past July 31. So he's very clear there. This shouldn't be there, but I'm not going to get rid of it, because there's only 2 weeks to go. Get your house in order. If you want to extend it, use Congress to do so. Now, Biden and Congress did absolutely nothing until 2 days before the deadline, in classic Washington style. Then all of a sudden they started pointing at each other going, you fix it. No, you fix it. No, you fix it. And then it expired. And Cori Bush, who's a new House member, she's actually an ex-homeless person herself, started protesting outside doors, sleeping out all night out the front of various buildings, trying to raise awareness of this. Bush, the quote from her is, I'm an organizer, I'm an activist, that's what I do. So I fell back on what I know to do, which was to be visible, put your body on the line, use whatever you have. Now, even though, as will become clear, I don't agree with the moratorium order in the form that it's taken place, I do respect Cori Bush in a massive way for doing her best and just doing what she could to help out the situation, even though I disagree with her position in this case. I do respect that. But anyway, it had an effect because they then passed a replacement order. Now, Jen Psaki, though, says that the order is not a replacement order because Brett Kavanaugh said you can't do that. It's a new order, a different order. She said what was announced was not an extension of the existing moratorium, which was, of course, national. It was a more limited moratorium that was going to be impacting and helping areas that were hardest hit by COVID. So different than the last moratorium. It goes to 90% of the American population rather than 100%. That's the difference. And that's supposed to last October 3. So that's the situation we're in now. Take it away, Bill. What do you think?
Well, and just to make clear that the one interesting thing about it, I think has a lot to do with the legality of it, is that it's the CDC making this order.
The Center for Disease Control, yes. Right.
And again, in Australia, the understandings of government are just a little bit different. And America, these sort of national orders about things, as we've seen with the freaking mask mandates and things like that, are not taken well. Okay. And of course, it's hypocritical on all these different levels and stuff like this. But even if it were Biden and the Congress unanimously saying this, that would still be viewed with suspicion on any number of levels, right? The fact that it's the CDC, it's just kind of funny. It's just like, it's like the post office, making some decisions about nuclear weapons or something like this. You just kind of want to go, thanks for your input, but we're gonna, and so that's that's basically all my thing. On the other hand, the one other thing I'll say about America is that the very fact that there's people in Washington caring about things like evictions is something that just I mean, literally 10 years ago, you would never, it's hard for me to imagine the Obama administration, like in the middle of the big financial downturn in the late 2000s, trying to do something about evictions, that sort of thing would never go. So it's just amazing. And this started, remember, under the Trump administration.
Yeah.
So it is kind of amazing.
Yeah, no, I agree.
But let's hear your rant.
Yeah, okay. Now I'm going to stop at various points, so you can jump in at any point in time. But let me take it point by point. First of all, I have never liked this eviction order, and you nailed it straight away about why. It should not be the CDC that's going around regulating the rules of housing across the whole of America. It's something for
what does the Food and Drug Administration think about this?
This is my point. Anyway, yeah, I think this is something that Congress should do. This is a power that Congress should display, not the CDC. It's not some random bureaucrat. But anyway, I want to emphasize that I think renters should have been helped during the pandemic. Of course, they should have been helped. But this is the most incompetent way to do it. If the government was competent, what they would do is pay rental support. That is the obvious thing to do. If renters can't pay the rent, give them money to pay the rent. Then that helps the renters. It helps the landlords, because the landlords get screwed if you say, oh, they don't have to pay the rent, but you can't evict them. Because I know everyone thinks landlords are like mustachio twisting evil people, but a lot of them are just small business people.
It depends. There's three kinds of landlords. There's big corporate things that have hundreds or thousands of units. Absolutely. And then there's sort of mom and pop operations who might have 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 units or own one or two buildings. Then there's sort of what you call the mom and pop. And sometimes there's mom and pop people who can basically, look, you want to pay us half rent for a year. You hear about things like that. People just saying, look, just pay us half the rent for the next year. And then there's others who can't even, they might have already lost their restaurant business or something. And they're renting out something above the restaurant, right? And if they don't lose the rental income. So of course, yeah, I'm totally with you.
Yeah, 41% of apartments are rented, the landlords are those mom and pop landlords that you're talking about. So it's a lot of them. And so what they tried to do, since they're completely incompetent, is they tried to have this eviction moratorium and at the same time send $47 billion worth of assistance to the renters that they then pay to the landlords. But none of it got out because they're completely incompetent. So now, 6 months later, $3 billion has been paid out of that $47 billion. $44 billion just sitting around doing nothing. And they just keep on extending the eviction moratorium. They're just hoping it'll fix itself rather than actually constructing an efficient government that works, right? Remember also that the Congress and the White House had a month to pass a new law and put the moratorium on decent legal footing. They did nothing. And now they're acting, anyway. And also I should add that this is all point one, there's more coming. I should also add that the foreclosure moratorium also came to a close on July 31, not just the eviction moratorium, the foreclosure moratorium, which there also was, which was stopping banks foreclosing on people who couldn't pay their mortgage. So guess what happens now? There's a whole bunch of landlords who haven't been paid rent for over a year, who haven't been able to afford to pay for their mortgage because they haven't had rent. But the eviction moratorium is continuing, so they still can't get the rent, but now they can be foreclosed on their mortgages. So there are going to be landlords who are thrown out of their houses because of this, who are going to have to sell off their houses. It's so poorly constructed and so incompetent. It's just, anyway, that's point one. Do you want to jump in or do I go on to point two?
No, I basically agree with you. And I guess my only train of thought was that one of the things that the myriad things that Trump did so incompetently is that like, just imagine if a different president had come out at the beginning and started explaining why we needed to do the masking or the lockdown and said, let me just explain let me give you a few extrapolations of what could happen. People aren't going to pay rent. landlords aren't going to be able to pay their mortgage, that this is sort of this slow motion, car accident hitting a passing police fire engine, going off a bridge and landing on a ferry kind of screw up that this is plainly imaginable 18 months ago.
Yeah, although to be fair, I mean, look, I agree with you what you just said, but to be fair, I think a lot of us didn't necessarily see everything that was coming back 18 months ago. I mean, this is a drum I've been banging for a long time, the eviction moratorium, I must say, but it's true that, like, I wouldn't say everyone was onto that one. But anyway, point two, and this goes to your CDC point as well. I have rarely seen an order more obviously pretextual than this. To remind you, this order is based on the Public Health Service Act, which authorizes the Secretary of Health and Human Services via the CDC to make and enforce such regulations as in his judgment are necessary to prevent the introduction, transmission, or spread of communicable diseases from foreign countries into the states or possessions, or from one state or possession into any other state.
Yeah, that's the silly thing about it. Yeah.
That's what this is supposed to do, this eviction moratorium, right? So their logic, this is literally, I'm going to read you a quote. This is their logic for why the moratorium helps COVID, which is what it's meant to be, right? Evicted renters must move, which leads to multiple outcomes that increase the risk of COVID-19 spread. Specifically, many evicted renters move into close quarters in shared housing or other congregate settings. These moves may require crossing state borders. According to the 2017 Census Bureau, 32% of renters reported that they would move in with friends or family members upon eviction, which would introduce new household members and potentially increase household crowding. Studies show that COVID-19 transmission occurs readily within households. So their point is that if you get evicted, you might move in with your friends or family, and that will spread COVID. Fuck off. Come on.
I'll definitely disagree a little bit, because that's not, it's a fact. I mean, it's a legitimate factor. They're not saying that, oh, maybe you're going to lose your cat. They're saying, look, we're having this national crisis. We want people to stay home, for Christ's sake. We don't need movers. We don't need more density. I mean, I don't think that's preposterous, but I agree with you on principle, but it's a little off message. I agree.
I'm not saying that zero people would spread COVID from being evicted. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the massive move that is an national eviction moratorium across the entire country is not justified by the, I don't know, maybe 1,000 or 2,000 cases of COVID across the nation that would occur because of that spread they just described. Let's face it, people are visiting each other still. Like, people are leaving their house. No, there is no one. Okay, there are some people in San Francisco maybe, but there are very few people across America who are literally prisoners of their own house and never leave the house. Like, people do mix a little bit. Like, it's just this suggestion that
one of the big problems though about America too is that again you have these two different media ecosystems, and the sort of right wing one kind of looks at all these cities as festering hellholes of Black and brown people, sure. And so some politicians, you look at Bronx and Queens and Manhattan, which is and to some extent downtown Philadelphia and a few other places. You don't have that many places in America that are that dense, right? But the things that go on in New Jersey, which I think is the densest state, and New York City and a few places, I mean, there are those kind of, you do have square miles of places that are nothing but 20 and 30 story buildings owned by people like the Kushners, right? Who are not treating their tenants really well. Those are the people I think you could kind of say they're thrown out in the street. Where are they going to go? And you can see those sort of clusters happening in low income areas. So it's one of those things that you could make a strong case in certain areas of the country. Probably not in a place like Phoenix.
Yeah, all I would say, I'll make two sub points to this point to just demonstrate what I'm talking about. Remember, America is a country that for the last 6 months, over 100,000 illegal immigrants a month have been processed without being COVID tested. Okay, coming from countries with high spread of COVID. Okay, so if you, I do not believe that the eviction situation would make as great an impact to COVID as that. And by the way, I'm not blaming them for COVID.
I think it's minor. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I want to quote their projections. These are their projections, the CDC's projections. Compared to a scenario where no evictions occurred, The models also predicted a 4 to 40% increased risk of infection. 4 to 40%. That's quite a range, even for those who did not share housing as a result of increased overall transmission. The authors estimate that anywhere from 1,000 to 100,000 excess cases per million population could be attributable to evictions depending on the eviction infection rates. 1,000 to 100,000 excess cases per million. That's quite a range.
I wonder, okay, so I wonder when all the books are written about all this stuff, because remember, this started under the Trump administration, right? Yeah. And one of the chaotic things there is that they're so dumb, they didn't even understand what right-wing doctrinaire positions are. And so they were probably thinking around saying, oh, maybe this is something that will get you some more votes in certain, you know what I mean? Because I'm sure they were thinking about this in a very political world. And then I wonder, once the Biden people came in, if they're going, let's try it, maybe Trump was doing it because he thought it would help him in Atlanta and Phoenix and some Sunbelt cities. Then the Biden people say, hey, maybe this will help me in Ohio or something, or vice versa, So
to be clear, I support the eviction moratorium.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
It should be done by Congress, and it should be done through rental assistance. Like so the landlords don't get screwed. That's all I'm saying. I don't want to screw these people over. I'm just saying this order is clearly not about COVID. It's clearly about inequality. Obviously.
Yeah, it's a silly bureaucratic thing. It's been this way for 6 months. Yeah.
And they're suggesting that just to remind you, 100,000 excess cases per million population. They're saying potentially. That's 10% of the population. Yeah. Like you'd be maybe 15% of America has had COVID so far in total over 18 months. And they're saying 10% of the population would get through evictions. Yeah. Anyway, okay, that's my second point. Right, also, all those models, they said just now, were based on the pre-vaccine phase of the COVID-19 pandemic. So 60% of America has been vaccinated as well. So those numbers are all obviously complete rubbish. Anyway, it's clearly pretextual. I haven't heard one person advocating for this moratorium because they suggest you needed to stop COVID. They always say, think about the renters, think about the fairness, think about the poor people, not think about the COVID. No one says that. But this is supposedly what it's about. Anyway, okay, I've gone on about this one enough. 3, Biden pushing an eviction order that he openly admits he thinks is unconstitutional as he announces it is extraordinary. During a press conference, he said, I don't think this is constitutional, but we'll see. It just blows my mind that he announces something and says, I don't even think it's legal while he announces it. That's so
again, and remember though, in the context of American politics, it's incredible that a president is coming out in public and saying, let's worry about renters who might get thrown out in the street.
That is right.
That is a fine American tradition. And I grew up, as a boy reporter in Berkeley, and rent control was one of the hugest things, in California. And I became a real student of it and the history of it, New Jersey and New York and places like that. And the strictest forms of it, which is in Berkeley and Santa Monica. So I have a long history in rental politics. And for decades, we're not going to be, what do you think we are, Berkeley? You think we're Santa Monica? We're not having any eviction protections, If you don't like it, it's America, you go rent someplace else.
Yeah.
So it's extraordinary that the president, yes, that's an extraordinary thing for him to say because it was dumb, but it's also extraordinary. To me, I'm sitting here thinking, I can't believe we're having this discussion. But I agree with you, they're doing it the wrong way.
It is nice. I do agree completely. It is nice to see them caring about evicting.
And here's the other thing. I want to write this piece like Biden should be more like Trump. What Biden should be doing is working with governors, going state by state, and then saying, hey, North Dakota, South Dakota, look at all these people out on the street. Look at your COVID rates. Look what we did in Georgia, or Arizona, or in Colorado, or Nevada. They should be putting down these markers and showing people how to do it by example, and shaming the streets. Keep putting them on the block and shaming them into facing as Marx would say, the contradictions of their position. And they don't do that.
I suppose the problem is in America, everything's so partisan that no matter how reasonable Biden sounds when he's saying something like that, in a red state, there's every incentive just to disagree with him for the sake of disagreeing with him.
Oh, right. But I mean, you take, that's the thing. What Trump does, though, is he takes the battle to you. He doesn't back down.
Yeah.
And so Biden should be going around saying, this is how we're going to do it. Look at the idiots in North Dakota. You know, he should stay in Minnesota, work with the governor. I forget if the governor's a Republican or not right now, but wherever, look, you know, go to the state where you've got a blue governor, work with them and say, look, this is the model we have. We're helping the actual people. You know, if you can show that you've been fired from your job because of COVID and you can't pay your rent, we're going to pay your rent and we have a system. Look how this worked. Look what's going now over next door in North and South Dakota. That's the kind of thing I think they should be doing, but they don't do that.
To be fair to Biden as well, he was kind of on a hiding in nothing when he made his announcement, because his COVID advisor had already the day before come out and said, get this quote, this is Gene Sperling. Well, I would say that on this particular issue, the president has not only kicked the tires, he has double, triple, quadruple checked. He's asked the CDC to look at whether you could even do targeted eviction moratoriums that just went to counties that have higher rates. And they as well have been unable to find the legal authority for even new targeted eviction moratoriums, which is literally exactly what they just did, right? So they announced, this guy the day before said, we tried to find X, but it's illegal. And then the day after they did X. So it's just, so he's on the kind of hiding to nothing. It's, but I would, for those who think that I'm splitting hairs about this kind of legality thing, I just want to just draw an analogy, which is that, because what Biden said was essentially, we think it's going to be found unconstitutional, but it will buy us some time, hopefully, to fix the situation. That's what he was saying, right? Now, I want to draw an analogy to if a red state governor started forcing people to not get abortions because they knew by the time the Supreme Court heard the case, it would be too late to get the abortion. Like, so you do something that you know the Supreme Court, I mean, not anymore, but until now, the Supreme Court would say this is unconstitutional, but you know it's going to take a month for the Supreme Court to say that, and by then it's too late. You'll get the thing that you're trying to do. You know, it's kind of, to me, it's a form of lawlessness, essentially, where you're... So,
and we're probably boring people to tears with this, but my one other theory about this is that that they're really whipping the progressives and the far, I don't want to say the far left, but the left of the Democratic Party into shape on a lot of things. And there hasn't been that much infighting. And maybe this is one thing that certain people want, and the Biden people are going, look, yeah, okay, we'll go to the mat on this for you.
Oh, they definitely want it.
That could be, I mean, it could be one thing, you know, just they, you know, they're saying, well, if nothing else, you got to give us this eviction thing. You got to go to the mat on it.
Oh, yeah.
We'll shut up about everything and help you present a united front on everything else.
I'm assuming that part of the politics of this is that Biden would much prefer the Supreme Court to say you can't have your eviction moratorium than to have conservative Democrats like Joe Manchin say you can't have the eviction moratorium, which is the truth. The truth is they would have passed this through Congress if Joe Manchin would have let them pass it through Congress. But, and his buddies, because I think it's more than Joe Manchin in this case. But yeah, it's Congress, it's the Democrats in Congress who denied this, not Joe Biden and not the Supreme Court. Like, they could have had it if Congress could have passed that legislation, but they couldn't get the numbers from Democrats. Right. So I think there is a political element there. The last thing I just want to say about this before we move on is I want to reserve some rant for Brett Kavanaugh, because the only reason all of this bullshit was possible was because of Brett Kavanaugh not doing his job as a Supreme Court justice. His job is to set precedent. That is his job, right? To say this is legal, this is illegal. I am drawing a very sharp line. I'm telling you why, so that other people can apply those laws in future conduct. That's what the Supreme Court is meant to do. And he said to himself, you know what? I think this is illegal, but who cares? I'm gonna be a nice guy. Yay, yay, come on, high fives, everyone. Woo, it doesn't matter, who cares? Sure, the law might have only had 2 weeks to go, but the precedent was going to last forever. And now what is on the books from the Supreme Court is that an eviction moratorium from the CDC is fine, because he ruled it was fine, even though in brackets he said really it's not fine. Now you might disagree with that ruling. You might say it should be fine, but the way the Supreme Court is meant to work is when 5 people think something's illegal, it's meant to become illegal. And Brett Kavanaugh fucked that up. And that's the reason this whole charade is happening, because he never actually, there's no law, there's no precedent on the books saying this moratorium is actually unconstitutional. There's every suggestion it will be, but it hasn't happened yet because of Brett Kavanaugh. And so here's my last brickbat. What do you reckon? You said enough.
Oh, were you saying what was I was going to say that's just part of it. There's going to be a long legal hangover from the Trump administration. So
there certainly is. Okay, I want to ask you, I'm going to do a stats nugget, and now I'm going to set you free on the topic which I know you want to talk about, which is Andrew Cuomo. We've talked about this on the show endlessly, so I'll let you
go. Oh, did you really? Oh, well, yeah. Well, I just think it's interesting. Are we talking about Newsom too, or have you done Newsom?
No, we haven't mentioned Newsom, so you can.
Oh, yeah, well, I just think it's interesting to talk to the fact that. Go ahead. Before
you do, stats nugget. Stats nugget. Thank you for getting the spirit, Bill. You do it so much better than Dr. Dave does. This is a really interesting one. I'll be interested to know what you think about this. According to a study by Indiana University's Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, in 2000, 66.2% of American households gave to charity. In 2018, 49.6% did, going down by 17%. In 2000, 46% of households gave to religious causes. In 2018, 29% gave to religious causes. After hovering between, sorry?
Forgive me, gave to religious what?
Causes.
Causes,
religious
okay.
Causes, yeah. After hovering between 55 and 57% from 2000 to 2008, the share of households donating to non-religious causes dropped from 52% in 2010 to a new low of 42% in 2018. But those giving, the fewer people who were giving, gave more. In 2000, the average donation to religious causes by Americans was $1,107. This decreased to an average of $771 in 2018, but the average giving to religious organizations by households that actually donated increased from $2,300 to $2,600. So what's your take on this? Why are Americans turning off charity, both religious and non-religious charity, but the people who are giving the charity are giving more?
I don't know. It's really complicated because that most people don't think about quote unquote giving to charity, right? The people who do go to church, they throw money into the whatever. And then a lot of people, might, send money to the ACLU or Planned Parenthood or any of these, the Center for Growth or whatever. And then I wonder how much of that is transferred into political giving. I wonder if a lot of people maybe, I haven't studied those figures, so I don't know, but I could maybe see people on the right saying, oh, I'm giving to Trump, I'm giving, that it's become such a cultural identifier on the right over the last 10 or 20 years, that maybe that's where the giving is going. Charities, it's another one of those things on the right. It's like, they don't want the government to do things because charity should do it, but they don't really talk up charity and they scoff at people who do. They would scoff at Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and, all these do-gooders trying to. So it's that weird thing, and it basically gives people permission not to donate. So I don't know other than that.
I don't know what to make of it either, because like America, generally speaking, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but in the past, I've definitely read that America gives significantly more to charity than any other country in the world per capita. And so what might be happening is Americans are just becoming like everyone else. Like America might be reverting to mean, might be becoming like Europe essentially. I don't know why.
Well, no, but in Europe, you have less because there's a social
net.
And so in America, it's like, oh, the government knows to do this. People should go to their church and get help. That it's that kind of mythic. It's this chimerical idea. And I don't know if I said this before, and I never ever got to do this story, but one of the things I always wanted to do, like in certain places, and even San Francisco, Berkeley, even Phoenix, there's areas, there's just 50 churches within a square mile or two, right? And I always wanted to send a reporter out and go to every church in like a square mile and say, what exactly are the good works that you do?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'll bet you there's a lot of churches that basically don't do anything.
Yeah.
Oh, we teach summer, we have Sunday school. It's like, well, that's not helping AIDS patients, is it? You know, that's not a soup kitchen.
No.
So I've often wondered like what exactly churches really do. And when there's that division between religious and quote unquote charitable giving, you know, what that actually means. And, you know, and so many of these churches are run by shysters now anyway, that it's kind of weird. I don't know. But on the other hand, there's this whole movement of kind of ecumenical kind of small C churches in a lot of Sunbelt cities where there's a thing called Unity, for example, that's much more ramped down and is not really about the giving and the money, and they kind of operate in a very refreshingly low level. So I don't know. I just don't know enough about the twists and turns, but there are a lot of scam religious things going on. They suck up a lot of money.
Well, maybe less now from the sounds of those numbers. Bill, tell us about the governors in trouble. Tell us about Cuomo and Newsom.
Well, it's so interesting because California and New York, obviously two of the biggest, what is New York second or third? I forget. I think at third after Texas now, or the biggest states are, you know, California, New York, Texas, and Florida. So you have the two Democratic governors, these deep blue states. And it's very funny because it's so different, because everything happened to Andrew Cuomo is so wonderfully all of his own making. And here's this guy, he has one of the most famous names in New York politics. Obviously, if people know, his father was Mario Cuomo, was a 3-term governor and a beloved figure in the Democratic Party, and probably could have run for president. And but he's one of these hard-charging, tough guys. And you have to understand, New York is a very, 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 very tough place. And if you think New York City is tough, Albany, which is the capital of the state of New York, is a really tough place. And it's different from Australia, because generally in these states, when they formed capitals, people in the rural areas didn't want the capital in the big city with the big city folks, right? So you have all these states where the capital is in the middle of frickin' nowhere. So in Illinois, it's Springfield, which is 3 hours south of Chicago. In New York, it's Albany, which is a couple hours north of New York City and stuff like that. So, and Albany is generally, I think, considered to be the toughest state capital in the country. Incredibly corrupt. Just, I mean, a huge percentage of the Albany legislature goes to jail every year. They've had presidents of the Senate, you know, convicted of felonies. Just, it's very, very, very bad. And of course, upstate New York, it's this happens in every state. There's a dichotomy between the rural and the urban places, but New York is a hugely, I should have looked this up, but there's like, I don't even know what the second biggest city in New York would be, like Syracuse or Buffalo maybe. And I'll bet you the population of Buffalo is about half the size of the population of Staten Island. Okay. I don't know if you know New York City, but Staten Island is this little tiny island borough. So New York probably has 50 or 60% of the population of the whole state, and upstate hates New York City and vice versa. And Albany is traditionally and vociferously hostile to New York City. Okay. And of course, and not only, go ahead, what?
Just so you know, I just looked it up. The second biggest city in New York State is Buffalo, 250,000. So I think you're right. Yeah.
That's pretty small.
Yeah.
Right. And New York is what, 8 or 9 million. Yeah. And when you, and to be fair, probably them, you know, Buffalo's going to have a metropolitan area around it, makes it probably a little bit bigger. But of course, you talk about the New York metropolitan area is what, 14 million. So, you know, the disparity is huge. So anyway, just to get this, and then of course you have Cuomo and de Blasio fighting, which is completely ridiculous too, because they're both Democrats and they should be allies. So, but of course, when you read that report, he's a complete thug. He's obviously been assaulting women and been a bully and been planning to attack the people who did affect complaints about him. And he's complete dead meat and toast. Everyone wants him gone. Biden wants him gone. The entire New York congressional delegation, which I think is almost entirely Democrat, wants him gone, and he's going to get impeached if he doesn't resign. So he's just being a tough guy, and everyone's saying, well, Andrew, you really need to make a decision. I'm going to fight it, but he's totally going to be gone. And the reason I think he's going to be gone is that you don't want to be impeached. I mean, it's it's really humiliating to resign like this, but being impeached by a Democratic entity is going to be very, very humiliating. So he's really a jerk. Chris Cuomo is a jerk as well, and it couldn't have happened to a nicer group of people.
The one thing that worries me a little bit, I mean, I desperately want him to be impeached. The one thing that worries me is the impeachment investigation has been going for 4 months now without a lot of output. And I worry that, I know that a lot of people in New York are still scared of Andrew Cuomo. And I worry that they still haven't pulled the pin. I'm hoping that the huge explosion in the last couple of days will be enough for them to actually pull the pin. But he's clearly not going to resign unless he knows for a fact they're going to impeach him otherwise. And
yeah, no, and honestly, it's only been a few days, and you have to understand he's a very larger than life crazy person. You know, he's really one of these alpha dick males, if you'll excuse the expression. And I'm sure that it's this thing, everyone around him knows he's going to resign. Chris Cuomo knows he's going to resign. It's the most humiliating report, and that state trooper, particularly the female state trooper's testimony. And the other thing is that he could be placed under indictment, you know, for criminal charges on several of these things. So basically, I think that's what's happening. And just when you have that many people coming out against him, and particularly the huge percentages of the actual people in the legislature, I don't think he. And then there's a weird thing. I was listening to some podcast, and I didn't know this. They that when you impeach someone in New York State, like you do it similar to the national, that the Senate, which holds the trial, gets this admixture of judges. So it's the Senate plus a bunch of high court judges in the state of New York who are going to be doing the trial. So that should be really fun. So, and then we have to pair that with the trouble, or it's not quite this bad, that Gavin Newsom is in California. He's a pretty popular California governor. He's one of the most progressive, probably the most progressive, radical governors California's had since a really long time. And he's avowedly progressive. And because of that, he has a lot of enemies on the right. They've been coming all sorts of things about him for a long time. And then, of course, the COVID stuff and some other things, they finally got a little bit of traction. And none of this, in theory, should matter because California is deeply, deeply, deeply blue state. And of course, they had a governor, you'll recall, who got recalled, right, 20 years ago in the early 2000s. And his name was Gray Davis. And he was treated a little unfairly, but he really wasn't a good politician. And he totally got swamped by all sorts of economic issues that were, to be fair, were chickens coming home to roost for several decades of mismanagement of California governors, both Republican and Democratic, okay? So, and of course, that's what put Arnold Schwarzenegger in the governor's office, and he didn't do so well. So, but Newsom has just done, I mean, he's been, you know, he's had what every successful politician has, which is a lot of luck, and has this enormous, whatever it is, 9/11 figure surplus, state surplus now, when 2 or 3 years ago, it had 11 figure deficit, right? And he's got a lot of things going for him, but he kind of screwed up. And one of the things he did, I don't know if you have this, did you remember the French laundry incident? Have you talked about that?
We haven't talked about it, but I know, but
okay.
You tell everyone
statewide mask mandate, right? And so everyone's kind of grunting, but hey, we're all in this together. So he runs off to this restaurant, which is up in what's called Napa Valley, which is the famous wine country in Northern California, to this restaurant called the French Laundry, which is, it's not even one of those shishi restaurants, one of those restaurants that is always like the #1 restaurant in the world. Okay, yeah, okay. It's in Yountville, but it's the guy, there's a restaurant in New York City in the Time Warner building. I can't remember the guy's name, Michael something or the Kramer, called Per Se. Have you ever heard of that? PERSE, Per Se. And it's the most famously expensive restaurant in New York City, right? Which is saying something. And so much so that there was this huge scandal about 6 years ago, and it was a 4-star New York Times restaurant, okay, which it's like a Michelin 3-star, except it's New York, so it's even more stars, right? And they went down from 4 stars till 2. And it was the restaurant review heard around the world. And again, it couldn't happen to a nicer group of people. But anyway, that's who that Kramer guy is. the French Laundry is, again, the West Coast version. It's in Napa Valley, the heart of America's wine country, et cetera, et cetera. Gavin Newsom goes up there and has a big fundraising dinner, not wearing a mask, while he's telling everyone else in California to. So just that combination of things made him seem like a buffoon, and he totally deserves all the derision he got. And so the upshot, okay, and there's all these complicated things though, because he's a very progressive governor. So he's been taking some strong moves on immigration, and they're not even all that big of a deal. They're just trying to stop some of the dehumanization and cruelty that goes on in that world. But of course, the right is using that against him. And then they're trying to drum up opposition on the COVID stuff. And so he's got it. And none of this matters though, because he's a popular Democratic governor in a big blue state, except the news this week is a couple polls came out that shows the race surprisingly close. Okay, that's the big news. That all of a sudden people are going, whoa, it's within the margin of error. And the other thing about it isn't so much that that is necessarily a death knell for him, because it isn't, and I don't think he's going to lose, but there's all these balls up in the air that we don't understand what's going to happen. They passed a law where ballots get sent out to every person in the state, right? Which is really good because it helps turnout. But also polls have also been showing that Republicans, of course, are really into, hey, let's recall this bozo. And so they're all head up about it. And Democrats, they've got a million other things to worry about. It's a Democratic state. Nothing's going to happen. What could possibly go wrong? So there's a couple things like that. And the final piece of the puzzle is you've probably heard that Caitlyn Jenner was one of the people running for the thing. And the way it works, and this is how it worked with Ray Davis, is that there's a ballot that says, hey, do you want to recall this guy or not? And you go, yeah, let's recall him. And then you say, hey, who do you want to replace him? Okay, so then you immediately vote for the governorship. But of course, if you're a Democrat, no one's running to be on the ballot to replace him, right? And not even that many no smart Republicans are either, because, and you get the clown car that you kind of get with the Republican Party, and Schwarzenegger was a lucky beneficiary of it way back then. And so basically there's hardly any serious people running. I mean, Caitlyn Jenner, of course, is a joke. And there's this conservative radio commentator who's African-American. And so he's one of those kind of conservative Black people in America who kind of calls himself a libertarian, is kind of fuzzy thinking. He's not really consistent on anything, but he was a successful businessman. And but he's kind of a bozo. And I think, and then a guy named Fountville or something like that, he used to be the mayor of San Diego, is also running. He's a serious guy because San Diego's a big city. So there is this kind of weird thing that if you support Newsom, that if he does get recalled, the people who can replace him are insane. So there's really a chance that this silly radio guy, Larry Page or whatever his name was, could be the beneficiary of all this craziness. But again, in the end, I think that, he probably, well, I don't think probably, he's got a gazillion dollars to spend in the last 6 months. And he can make it as, hey, we don't want to turn California over to the crazies, which is a very, very convincing thing in California. So I'm not worried about that. And the other thing is that I was actually really surprised when I looked up the money, because you'd think there'd be sort of a lot of dark money pouring in to bring him down. And you really don't see that. So they've been doing surprisingly well, but I don't actually think there's really a chance that he would get recalled, but I could be wrong. What do you think?
Well, I'm trying to wrap my head around a couple of these stories, because the French Laundry thing seems so massive to everyone in California, and it seems pretty minor to me. But there's no doubt that really resonated. Like, they go on about it so much. I mean, well, I'm trying to.
It's silly. But it's just silly when you consider the outrages on the that Republicans do like every day before breakfast, and but on the other hand, it's just so unkeeping with that. I think a lot of people in San Francisco have been feeling like they've been, really went out of their way to support him. So go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
I'm just going to say that, I'm sort of trying to translate my own head, because obviously fine dining isn't really my thing. And I'm trying to sort of translate to the finest, most expensive restaurant in the world, to me, is Nando's. So I'm just imagining someone not wearing a mask in Nando's, and that makes me angry. No, I was going to say, for me, seriously, there's two basic issues here. Well, 2 points worth making. First of which is that Newsom's really been stitched up by COVID here in a couple of ways. First of all, the reason why the governors aren't constantly recalled in California is it takes an enormous number of signatures on a petition to even set up a recall. Like I feel like this is like 7 million. It's big. It's a lot, and it's some number of million signatures you need, and normally you just can't do it. But because of COVID, they extended the period for like 3 or 4 months for a serious.
Oh wait, he totally lucked into that, or
yeah.
the recall movement did. Yeah, I don't know if it's 7 million, but it's more than 1 million. Yeah, which is a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. I'll look it up because I don't want to give you guys bullshit numbers. But yeah, anyway, it was a lot, and normally you can't do it. But this time they had an extra 3 months or so, I think, from memory, to do it in, which gave them, and they got nothing else to do. It's a lot. California was locked down. They had literally nothing else to do. So the people who were trying to push it had all the opportunity in the world to get this lockdown up. And the French Laundry thing happened right in the middle of that period. So they got to ride off the outrage of that particular story for a few weeks while the whole of California was locked down and pissed off. So they no doubt bummed a whole bunch of signatures off that incident in itself. That's the first thing. The second thing is since the signature period went for like 6 months in total, probably even more. It was a long, long time. I mean, every time there was bad news on COVID, they got a whole bunch of signatures. And then you can't take the signature back when things go well again. And so even when his poll numbers went up, the signatures didn't go down. So every time his poll numbers went down, the signatures would go up, and gradually over time, they just got there. And so that's the first way he was stitched up by COVID. The second way he was stitched up by COVID was, the second thing is that, hang on, I'll get it.
Hey, do you want me to add one other thing while you're thinking?
Yes, please do.
That there was one permutation I didn't get to, that the polls that are showing him close are specifically about likely voters.
Yes, this is what I was about to say.
Is that it? Yeah.
Yes, this is it. This is it.
Yeah, and so it's it's a really good polling company. It's the Institute for Governmental Studies, right, at Berkeley, which is I used to deal with, which is a very serious operation. And if you look at the overall support, it's overwhelmingly for him. Like if you just do a poll on him, he's fine. But once they get into likely voters, you get into places where it's narrowed within the margin of error or close to the margin of error. And but then, and that's why it all comes back to this thing about making it easy for people to vote and sending the ballots to people's houses. Like, will that kind of make everyone a likely voter? And so California will revert to where it should be, or you'd expect it to be politically? Or is it something where the Democrats are still going to go, I just don't even care enough to stick the ballot in the mail?
Yeah.
But when he had so much money, it seems likely that he'd be able to remind people, hey, stick the frickin' ballot in the mail, or one of these bozos is going to be governor.
Yeah, this is the point I was going to make. Yeah, the polls have him more than 10 points up. It's just the likely voter model that has it basically tied. Because as you say, this is a big deal for Republicans, for Democrats, whatever. So we will see. It'll be interesting to see how the absentee vote fixes that or deals with that.
Yeah.
1.5 million votes is what you need. So
remember when remember at just before the 2020 election, and there was the Iowa Register poll in Iowa that said that Trump was going to win by 8 points, and all the other polls that said it was very close, and everyone said, the Register finally lost its mojo.
Yeah.
Because remember, it's that respected poll, and then the election came and the poll was right on. And the IGA is a little bit like that. Like, I wouldn't sneer at it though, because they, it's the LA Times too, and so it's a serious operation. So, but again, it would just be a cataclysmic event if he were to be recalled.
Yeah, it'd be pretty big deal. I was going to say one other thing about Cuomo. We've kind of moved past him, but I just wanted to say that I think Cuomo's future, and it shouldn't be because Cuomo's done a lot of things wrong, but I think Cuomo's future is a big deal for Me Too, because Me Too, it started with a bang. When it first started, there were a bunch of scalps, usually entertainers or business people, like Mettler and people like that, pretty heavy hitters in the entertainment industry in particular. Then they took out a politician, then Al Franken, and there were, I remember at the time there was all these think pieces going, the men are going to be so worried that they're going to be able to turn around without getting the sack because of Me Too. Well, it didn't turn out that way. people worked out pretty quickly, probably thanks to, I wouldn't say entirely thanks to Trump, but it probably helped. People suddenly thought, hang on, if you just do nothing, what are they going to do to you? Just don't fall on your sword. Just refuse to resign. And Trump obviously perfected that when he became president during his election campaign in 2016. And ever since then, that's been the way. That's what the Virginia governor did, and his entire cabinet full of corrupt people. That's what a lot of people have been doing. And it's been working.
Let's give Bill Clinton credit for starting this.
That's true. That is absolutely true.
He's the guy who envisioned the though of course it's Nixonian too. You just stonewall.
Yeah.
But honestly, just given Democratic politics overall, and then you're talking about New York State. So it's just, I don't want to be glib in the way people on cable news always are, but this is a guy whose career is just toast. I mean, that report is devastating. And in that world right now, there's no one's going to talk to him. No one's going to give him money. There's really big, leftist companies that are in New York City that are going around to everyone saying, don't even, I don't know. I just can't even imagine him not resigning. But I mean, stranger things have happened, but I think he's going to.
I hope you're right, because everything you just said is correct. But there's no doubt from the way he's acting, he's going to give it his best to hang in there. That's certainly Cuomo's style, to try and hang in there for as long as he possibly can. But if you have a situation where Cuomo, usually when people hang in there and they get the benefit of the doubt from their co-partisans, it's because it's a 50-50 state or situation. They don't want to give away a seat to the opposition. New York is not like that. They can replace him with anyone and they will win the election in New York in 2022, right?
He's already lost all those people. But honestly, I don't think this is one of those cases. Like, I don't think he's stonewalling yet. I just think he hasn't accepted reality yet, which is different. Yeah. Like, I don't think his whole team and Chris Cuomo and everyone else is sitting there go, okay, we're going to fight this. Here's our game plan. Yeah. I think everyone's saying, it's over, Andrew. And he's like, no, but I think he's going to damage, he's already damaged his brother's career, who is already a buffoon. And now he's a buffoon who's been helping his ridiculous predatory brother cover up all this stuff. So he's taken Chris down with him. And I don't know. It's a very, very disgusting thing. But I think just my analysis of it, he hasn't accepted reality yet. There's not a Cuomo Stonewall yet. But
that may well be the case. It may well be. I hope he does resign. That would be wonderful. But all I'm saying is that if we have a situation where they don't need to stick around for partisan reasons. Their party does not need them to hold power, right?
He's out of it.
Yeah, he's having trouble raising money. He is incredibly unpopular. I read out a poll today where 11% of people, New Yorkers, thought he deserved re-election, including 18% of Democrats. Okay, so incredibly unpopular. He's on toast as far as all these accusations go. There is so much verification for these accusations. There's just no doubt.
He's not going to be on TV anymore. He's not going to be having COVID. I don't know what he's gonna, and nobody wants to, and he can't even go to New York City. He's gonna have to spend all his time in Albany.
Yeah. Wait, my point is, in this situation which we just described, if that person survives it with their career, then there's the last time anyone will resign because of Me Too reasons.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So this is my point. My point is, I really, really, really hope he either resigns or gets impeached in a hurry, because this is the template that future transgressors will be looking towards.
Yeah. So and I don't know, are you following the Scott Rudin case in New York too? It's very interesting.
Oh, no.
He's a famous Hollywood producer who's worst. Has the worst reputation ever in Hollywood, which is saying something. Like, just about the most abusive, computer throwing, fire, new employees 3 times the first day, abusive. and no sexual stuff, just absolute visual, physical and verbal abuse. Okay.
Yeah.
So there was a great interview with Barry Diller, who used to be the head of Paramount, is one of the major dudes in Hollywood history the last 50 years. And now he runs a big, huge internet empire. And he's a multi-billionaire guy. He just built that new island off Manhattan. And he was one of Scott Rudin. Okay, and Scott Rudin is a, what do they call it? He's an EGOT, right? He has an Emmy, a Grammy, an Obie, and or an Oscar and a Tony, okay? Yeah. And he's won a couple of Best Picture Oscars and stuff like that. So he had to step away. The Times and the Hollywood Reporter finally took him out. So he had to step away. And then you could see Diller kind of doing this stuff. Oh, well, you know, if all those stories are true, and, you know, I've worked with Scott Rudin for 20 years, I've never seen any of that stuff, which I thought was really interesting because he's obviously lying, really lying. And so that's the beginning of the kind of rehabilitation of Scott Rudin. And if Scott Rudin gets away with it, that's going to be pretty, that's going to be another one of these. And my train of thought on that is I was thinking, well, a lot of Hollywood companies, you know, have a huge footprint in New York and they don't put up with this much any either, but that's a big exception right now. So it's going to be kind of hard for Barry Diller, you know, who literally built an island off Manhattan as a park, like this multi-billion-dollar philanthropic thing. You should look it up. It's pretty amazing. It's hard for him to call up Andrew Cuomo, you know, because then Cuomo says, well, what about Scott Rudin? So
what about? Always what about?
One of the reasons. Say it again.
In these situations, it's always what about? What about? What about? What about?
No, that's why,
perfect.
And that's why people on the left are so vociferous about that, because they want to kind of inoculate themselves from that. So that's why I think he's going to go. And I don't think Scott Rudin is coming back either.
Talking about people who have survived, at least so far, potentially devastating revelations. There was a revelation in the last week from about a guy called Jeffrey Clark, who I want to talk about briefly on my way towards Merrick Garland. Now, the deputy attorney general under Trump in the final days, around December 2020, was a guy called Richard Donoghue. And thankfully, Richard Donoghue was a bit of a note taker. And he took a lot of notes in this critical period at the end of December, early January, leading up to the January 6th riot. And those notes have been released to Congress. And so they're gradually being released to the public as time goes on. And we've found out this week a couple of very interesting things from those notes, assuming they're true, and I'm sure they are. This guy's a Republican, you know, he's classic Republican. He's a more old school Republican than anything else. During the December 27 call, 2020, Trump pressured acting Attorney General at the time, Jeffrey Rosen, who was the replacement for Bill Barr after Bill Barr resigned because he didn't want anything to do with these election hijinks, and acting Deputy Attorney General Richard Donoghue to falsely declare the election illegal and corrupt, even after the Justice Department had not uncovered evidence of widespread vote fraud. So Trump said, apparently a quote on the notes was, just say that the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman, he said. Okay, they told them the information was false. And then Trump said, these people who are saying the election isn't corrupt are the corrupt ones. So that was a little standoff. And then after that, Jeffrey Clark, who was the underling for Jeffrey Rosen, so he was the Deputy Attorney General, Jeffrey Clark followed up. And he sent an email to Rosen and Donoghue the day after, trying to get them to help pressure Georgia into overturning the election. This is what his email said. The Department of Justice is investigating various irregularities. Oh, this is what he wanted them to say to Georgia. The Department of Justice is investigating various irregularities in the 2020 election for the President of the United States. The department will update you as we are able on investigatory progress. But at this time, we've identified significant concerns that may have impacted the outcome of the election in multiple states, including the state of Georgia. While the Department of Justice believes the governor of Georgia should immediately call a special session to consider this important and urgent matter, if he declines to do so, we share with you our view that the Georgia General Assembly has implied authority under the Constitution of the United States to call itself into special session for the limited purpose of considering issues pertaining to the appointment of presidential electors. Okay, so let me translate. He is trying to get the Department of Justice to send a letter to Georgia saying, we think that the Georgia Assembly, State Assembly, should overturn the election in Georgia. That is what he is saying. If you read between the lines there, and you have to read very carefully, it's pretty obvious. He is suggesting that the Department of Justice has found enough evidence to suggest that that is a good thing for Georgia to do, to overturn the election. This was the acting Deputy Attorney General of the United States at the time. He told Rosen and Donahue, quote, I think we should get it out as soon as possible, that letter, that is. Personally, I see no valid downsides to sending out the letter. I put it together quickly and would want to do a formal site check before sending, but I don't think we should let unnecessary moss grow on this. So all we've been talking about for the last few months.
What's the downside?
What's the downside? What's the possible downside? Just to be clear, he is saying in this letter that he wants to send to Georgia, the Department of Justice has been running an investigation and found all this evidence, when there is literally no investigation going on in the Department of Justice. He's flat out lying. And Bill Barr has resigned in protest to all this shit. And he wants to lie to Georgia to get them to overturn the election. So all these times we've been saying, oh, what might happen in 2024? What might happen in 2022? It almost happened in 2020. That was the Department of Justice. That wasn't Trump fart-assing around and talking to guys online and the Proud Boys marching outside the White House with Wolverine horns or whatever. That's not that. That's the Deputy Attorney General instructing a state to overturn an election. That's what that is. And what's happened to Jeffrey Clark? Absolutely nothing. He's landed on his feet. He's fine. He's got a great job now, and he's going to be back at the next Republican administration. And it's a real worry, I have to say.
It's really crazy because when you go back to Nixon, people forget Haldeman went to jail. Ehrlichman went to jail.
Yeah.
For doing nothing like this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really crazy. And my favorite line in those stories was when Trump was, all these people were arguing with him, of course, and they said, look, there's no evidence. And he said something like, you're not reading the same stuff on the internet I am.
Yes. Yeah, I know.
You're not reading at Trump Forever _Dallas
I know.
On Twitter the way I am.
I know. The thing is that when Trump does it, it's kind of funny because it's just so laughable and you go, well, that's never going to work. But when a real apparatchik who is in a real position of power and who actually knows how to make shit happen, doesn't just get on Twitter and whines about things. He knows how to make shit happen. When he's beavering away trying to actually make it happen, and he's only stopped by someone, thank God, who was in the right position at the right time, that's a lot scarier. And that's where we're at. That's where we were at. Because you can only imagine what it'll be like the next time. But anyway, so that I bring that up because that was where we came from. Now we've got Merrick Garland. And I want to talk about Merrick Garland a little bit because the left, I think, are in two minds about Merrick Garland. Because they're like he's trying to be Attorney General norms, but that doesn't necessarily give you what you want at times. And I'll just go through a couple of things.
Okay. And then I got a thing to mention about him as well. And then I think I have to go after Merrick Garland though. Okay. I'm kind of running out of time. Okay.
Oh, sorry. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. Why don't you say what you wanted to say about Merrick Garland first?
Okay. Just really quickly. All I was going to say is that he is really being very cautious in certain ways and not cautious in other ways. And a lot of, he has been kind of forgoing a lot of the stonewalling that the previous administration did. And often administrations will stonewall Congress and things like this. And then a new administration will come in and kind of go, well, we want that option too. But they have been kind of throwing some Trump people under the bus, which is good. And all I was going to mention, which came to mind because we were talking about Phoenix and Arizona, is I don't know if you noticed the civil rights case they just opened against the Phoenix Police Department, which is super interesting on a number of levels. And Phoenix has a female Black police chief, which is interesting, and a female mayor as well. And this has been what they said is, look, we're going to look into the Phoenix Police Department for officer shootings, treatment of homeless people, treatment of mentally ill people, and stuff like that. And, you know, again, I lived in Arizona for a while. It's a racially divided state. There's a large Hispanic population, which is largely hidden, pretty small Black population. And what's been happening is that there was a large, given the size of the city, there was a large number of police shootings. I think there was 25 or 26 last year. Okay, which is much higher than it is normally. And on a per capita basis, it's a lot more. It's not even per capita, it's a lot more than happened in New York City, if you can believe it, which is really interesting. Yeah. And then of course, you know, we have a lot of trouble. I mean, all these Sunbelt cities are big trouble with the way they treat homeless people. And of course, when we talk about defund the police, what we want is we want some of that money put to non-violent resolution of some of these cases, because there's a lot of mentally ill people on the streets in America. Anyway, all the point I was going to make that I think is interesting, because I went back and started looking, well, what sort of these shootings are there? Because again, you don't have that many African Americans in Phoenix, so you don't quite have that kind of black-white racial tensions. And but you do have poor versions of the city. But as I've always said, you know, the crime rate in Phoenix is almost is very, very, very small. So, and I went back and there were some big investigative reports about it. But the thing is that I couldn't really find any cases that were, actually there was one case that's a little questionable, but in every case that's in all the newspapers, you know, the police find some guy there, he's robbing a store, and he comes out of a car with a gun and points it at the police. They say, put the gun down, and he doesn't, he gets shot. And there's probably a lot of, and if someone just has a knife, that's probably not a good reason to shoot someone. But I was really struck that there didn't seem to be too many cases that were plainly instances of excessive use of force that you've seen in some other cities. So I kind of find that all interesting. But it is super significant because Phoenix is the 5th largest city in the United States. It's the size of Philadelphia. And so the fact that the Attorney General is going into there, and particularly in a purple state, which is very interesting, on the basis of not much more than a large number of shootings, and not all these are killings, right? These are just shootings. I find that kind of interesting. We'll have to kind of see how it works out. But as far as I can tell, this isn't a case where, you know, the Phoenix police have shot like 15 unarmed Black men in the last year or anything like that.
No, sure. Well, all I was going to say is I'm just going to flesh out a little bit on what you actually summarized quite well, which is the two sides to Merrick Garland. Like, first of all, he started off the year chasing a bunch of leakers. It blew up in his face a little bit, and so he said, "Okay, no more leakers. We're not going to be chasing leakers anymore. We're not going to be chasing up reporters' records for leakers and so forth." But what he didn't do, and to be fair, he was never as bad as under Trump. Like, they had a massive spike in prosecution referrals in 2017 for leaking, mainly because of Mike Pompeo and the CIA. They had 118 referrals for prosecution for leakers in 2017.
Wow, yeah.
Then in 2018, it was 88. In 2019, it was 71. The next most in the last 20 years was Bush. In 2007, had 54. So that tells you how big that was, right? 118. Anyway, but he didn't stop any of the leak investigations that were going on before he was there. So, for example, there's a guy called Daniel Hale who just got 45 months jail for sharing info, like leaking out info, like to reporters, like 90% of drone strikes didn't hit the intended target, for instance. And he exposed that the American government officially labels unknown people it kills as enemies killed in action, unless they're proven to have been civilians after their death somehow. And Obama didn't prosecute him. He was caught under Obama. Obama didn't prosecute him because they said, fair enough, he's a conscience leaker, obviously. But Trump did. Biden kept it going. And now he's in jail for 45 months. Because and Merrick Garland could have stopped that prosecution, but he didn't. And that's he does a lot of that. He does a lot of keeping things going that Trump had going before. Another example of that, E. Jean Carroll suing Trump for defamation because rape is past the statute of limitations. If you recall, she's the one who said that she was a gossip columnist who said Trump threw her up against a wall or a dressing room in the Manhattan department store back in 1995.
For Goodman's, yeah.
That's the one. And she said he pulled down his pants, opened his pants up and forced himself on her. Trump said she was lying. This never happened. He'd never met her, etc. And he couldn't have raped her because she's not his type. Of course, classic Trump. She said she still has the dress that she was wearing and could get tested for DNA. And she wanted Trump's DNA to match it, which is a very interesting development. And history obviously doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. We all know about that story. The court said yes. The court said yes, you can get his DNA. Bill Barr stepped in. He transferred the case to federal court and substituted the federal government for Mr. Trump as the defendant. The reason that's significant is because federal law forbids government employees from being sued for defamation, and if they act within the course of their employment. And so her case would then be dismissed. No DNA evidence, right? Federal court rejected the argument, right? They rejected the argument from Bill Barr. The judge said there is not a single person in the United States, not the president and not anyone else, whose job description includes slandering women they sexually assaulted. That's a great quote from a judge, right? So it stayed under, so the case stayed under Trump and it proceeded. Once again, she's going for his DNA. Biden's DOJ with Merrick Garland is appealing that judgment and running the same argument again on appeal, trying to defend Trump so he doesn't have to give up that DNA, because they said, quote, elected public officials can and often must address allegations regarding personal wrongdoing that inspire doubt about their suitability for office. Officials do not step outside the bounds of their office simply because they're addressing questions regarding allegations about their personal lives. So they're saying because he answered these questions during a press conference that was part of his job, answering that question was part of his job. So he was fulfilling his job when he defamed her. He wasn't fulfilling his job when he sexually assaulted her, allegedly, but he was fulfilling his job when he defamed her because it was during a press conference, an official press conference. That's what they're saying. And this is classic Garland, because he's trying to, as you say, protect the institution and so forth. Now,
yeah,
you can understand where sorry?
Well, that law is a very complicated law, right? And and my understanding of it, and again, I'm not a lawyer and all this stuff, but my understanding is that that it isn't even, it's not the government's choice. The government has to, that's the law, that the government just takes over the case.
Yeah.
Like you get sued. It isn't like, oh, the government says, oh, do you deserve this or not? They just do it. Yeah. And then you can't sue the government. And the process is that the government, when you're sued, the government can take over your case, and but you can't sue the government for defamation. So if it's a defamation case, it's per force thrown out, right? Yeah. That's the thing. And then there's the different position of the president vis-a-vis, the assistant secretary for Veterans Affairs, right? Yes. That the president has a specific position in the executive branch. And so I don't know if I 100% agree with that or not, that, he should definitely go to trial and they should produce his DNA. But I kind of understand that that it'd be very easy to completely slow down the government with a million suits otherwise, that anything a politician says is defamatory. And a lot of the times you have immunity if you're a politician speaking in Congress. You can basically say anything and you can't get sued. So there's kind of a way that there's a logic to it, but it's very frustrating in this case. But she should have brought this up 10 years ago. She should
have. But I was going to say that Mo Brooks tried the same defense though, now under Merrick Garland, rather than Merrick Garland continuing what had happened before. And Merrick Garland, he tried the same defense for his January 6th, being sued for his assistance in the events of January 6th. And he said, I'm doing it. I did it in the course of my employment. He tried exactly the same defense.
Oh, right. That's the silly one. Right. Yeah.
And the DOJ just said, nah, that's part of campaigning. That's not part of being a congressman. And so, so once again, they maintained what had come before, but something new they didn't take up. Similarly, death penalties. Biden is against the death penalty. Biden has said he wants to get rid of the death penalty, but Garland right now is petitioning the Supreme Court to let the Boston bomber be executed, even though it's against Biden's policies, because Trump started it and he's trying to continue seamlessly the Department of Justice's positions. And
I was just going to say that the Democratic Party has a very amusing, I don't want to say amusing, but amusing in the dark sense of the world with the death penalty. You know, they're against it, except when they need to get elected and they don't want it to be an issue. So there could be a thing where smart, I hate to say this, but smart Democrats say, I am not fighting that issue. They just let it go, because the minute you start doing anything in death penalty, all you're going to hear about in the next election cycle is the death penalty.
Well,
so they've been burned.
The strangest example is that Trump was trying to claim people's property to build the wall on the southern border, right? And then Biden came in and said, I'm not even going to build the wall. We're not doing this anymore. Those people don't need to worry. But Garland didn't drop any of the cases. And so these people are currently being dispossessed of their land one by one to build a wall, when Biden doesn't even want to build the wall, because Garland is just keeping those lawsuits going, which is interesting as well. But having said all that, I was just going to say, Garland, it's because of Garland that we got those notes from Donahue, because he said anything to do with January 6th is going to be public. Like he said, no executive privilege. We're not asserting executive privilege for any of this stuff. So we're going to get a lot more during this commission than we otherwise would have when Trump was stonewalling the whole time during his impeachment trials. And that's because of Garland. So, and he also, Garland has sent Trump's taxes to the House Ways and Means Committee, which he should, because that was always dodgy. So, there's 6 of one and half does the other with Garland. You take some, you lose some, But anyway, do you have anything else to say? I know you got to go.
I always get, the last thing I'll say on E. Jean Carroll is that maybe they should get DNA sample from Mary Trump.
What's that?
Who's his niece.
Yeah.
And so like Trump would share half the DNA with his brother, and then that his daughter would be half. So in theory, you'd have a quarter match with the DNA. So maybe she can do that. I bet Mary Trump would volunteer her DNA.
That is a great call. Good thinking. You should be a dodgy lawyer. You should be a Boston legal style lawyer.
I could be a Michael Avenatti. Hey, did you follow the person on Twitter who's been live tweeting the Michael Avenatti trial?
No.
Oh, it's really great. He's being his own lawyer. He's representing himself in one trial.
I believe that.
This is the one where he stole the money from all his clients.
Yeah.
So he has to cross-examine his own clients, and one of them is this disabled guy who, he had a wrongful death suit. That's a guy who was paralyzed. Multi-million-dollar settlement, stole the money from the guy, and then I guess another one of the people he stole money from was a woman, and I guess he made her cry on the witness stand while he was cross-examining her.
I'm sure that will work real well.
America throws them up. There's Cato Kalin one year, and we've got a million of them. Mountebanks and poltroons.
Yeah. Yes. That's good. The callback. I like it. Good way to end. So thank you very much, Bill. For, as always, you've been wonderful, and good luck with your class. And,
it should be really fun. And thank you. It's so much fun doing this.
Yeah, I'll look forward to having you on again real soon. Thanks a lot.
Talk to you soon. Thanks, Chaz. Bye.